When Ethan Cole found a stranger cooking in his cabin after 3 days hunting rustlers through Montana's frozen hills, his first instinct was to reach for his gun. But the young woman at his stove did not flinch. She did not run. She just met his eyes with the kind of exhaustion that comes from having nowhere left to go. "The town sent me," she said quietly. And in those 4 words lay a scandal, a betrayal, and the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. Two people the world had cast aside, one isolated ranch, and a winter that would change everything. If you want to see where this story of redemption and unexpected love leads, stay with us until the end, and please drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. Now let us begin. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Montana range, casting long shadows across the frozen earth as Ethan Cole urged his horse up the final rise toward home. 3 days in the saddle, 3 days tracking cattle rustlers through snow and wind until he had finally run them off his land. His body ached in places he had stopped naming years ago. His beard was thick with ice where his breath had frozen against his face. But the cattle were safe. That was what mattered. The war had taught him to survive on little. The years since had taught him to expect even less. His ranch spread out below him, modest by any measure. A timber cabin with a stone chimney, a barn that leaned slightly to the north, corrals that needed mending come spring, and land that rolled away toward the mountains in all directions. It was not much, but it was his. Bought with army pay and built with his own hands after he had come back from the war and found there was nothing waiting for him in Ohio except memories of people who were not there anymore. Montana had seemed far enough away from all of it. He had been 23 when he arrived in 1867, 33 now in this winter of 1877. A decade of hard living had carved lines into his face and turned his brown hair gray at the temples. His hands were scarred from rope and leather. His eyes held the color of weathered steel, and his body carried the kind of lean, coiled strength that came from labor and deprivation rather than ease. People in Stillwater, the town 15 miles east, knew him as a man who kept to himself, polite enough when business required it, fair in his dealings, but solitary by choice. Most folks had learned not to push beyond the boundaries he set. He preferred it that way. Ethan guided his horse down the slope, his gaze sweeping the ranch with the automatic assessment of a man who had learned to notice details. The chickens were pecking in their run. The milk cow stood in the barn paddock. Everything looked normal. He pulled up short. Smoke rose from his chimney, not the thin dying wisps of a banked fire left 3 days ago. Thick, steady smoke, the smoke of a fire being tended. His hand moved to the rifle at his saddle. His body went still in that particular way that combat had burned into his bones. He scanned the clearing. No strange horses, no wagon, no obvious signs of trouble. But someone was in his cabin. Ethan dismounted in one fluid motion. He tied his horse to the rail with quick, efficient movements. He drew the rifle, checked the load, and moved toward the door with the careful silence of a man who had scouted enemy positions in the Shenandoah Valley. The smell hit him 3 feet from the threshold. Bread, coffee, something cooking with onions and herbs. His hand hesitated on the door latch. Then he shoved it open. The rifle came up as he stepped inside. The woman at his stove spun around with a gasp, a wooden spoon clutched in one hand. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. She was young, mid-20s, he guessed, with dark brown hair pinned up in a practical bun, though several strands had escaped to curl around her face. She wore a simple gray dress with a white apron, both clean but well-worn. Her hands were red from work. Not a delicate woman, but not hardened either. Something in between. Her eyes were a clear hazel, wide with surprise, but not, he noticed, with fear. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan's voice came out rougher than he intended. Gravelly from 3 days of cold and silence. The woman straightened her shoulders. He saw her swallow once before speaking. "My name is Lydia Moore. The town sent me." "The town?" He did not lower the rifle. "The town sent you to break into my cabin." "Not break in." Her voice was steady, though he could see the pulse jumping in her throat. "Mr. Brennan gave me the key. He said you needed help." "A housekeeper, Sam Brennan." Ethan's jaw tightened. Sam ran the general store in Stillwater and apparently thought he had the right to meddle in other people's business. And what makes Sam think I need help? I do not know his reasoning. Lydia set the spoon down carefully. Her hands came together in front of her apron. I only know he offered me this position and I accepted it. Ethan finally lowered the rifle, though he did not set it down. He looked around his cabin with fresh eyes, seeing it as she must have seen it. The dishes he had left unwashed before riding out, the dust on every surface, the cold stove and empty pantry shelves, the bedroll on the floor because he had been too tired to make up the cot properly. The place looked like exactly what it was. The dwelling of a man who had stopped caring about anything beyond basic survival. I do not recall advertising for a housekeeper, he said. No, Lydia's chin lifted slightly. Mr. Brennan said you would not. He said you would probably be angry. But he gave me the key anyway and told me if I could manage 3 days without you here, you might let me stay. Might? Ethan leaned the rifle against the wall, then pulled off his heavy coat and hat. The cabin was warm, genuinely warm, for the first time in months. And why would you want to stay in the middle of nowhere with a stranger who might shoot you for trespassing? Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe. Or shame. She looked away toward the pot on the stove. Because I have nowhere else to go, she said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Ethan recognized the weight of them. He had said something similar once, years ago, to the land office clerk who had asked why he wanted property so far from civilization. He studied her more carefully now. She was pretty enough in an understated way, but there was something in her eyes, a kind of weariness that had nothing to do with physical labor. The look of someone who had been knocked down and was not entirely sure she could get back up. You are from back east, he said. Not a question. Philadelphia. She met his eyes again and he saw her decide something. I came west 6 weeks ago to marry a man I had been corresponding with for 8 months, a banker in Stillwater named Thomas Whitmore. When I arrived, he informed me he had changed his mind. Ethan's expression did not change, but something cold settled in his chest. He knew Thomas Whitmore. Slick hair, soft hands, always talking about investments and opportunities. The kind of man Ethan instinctively distrusted. Changed his mind, he repeated. Yes. Lydia's hands tightened on her apron. He met me at the station, took one look at me and said I was not what he expected, that he could not marry a woman who did not meet his standards. Then he told everyone in town I had come uninvited, that I was, she paused, drawing a breath, that I was a woman of questionable virtue who had followed him west without permission. Son of a... The words came out before Ethan could stop them. Yes, Lydia's smile was bitter. I spent 2 weeks in the boarding house, spending what little money I had left, while he made sure everyone knew his version of events. Then Mrs. Patterson told me she could not keep me any longer, that it was not appropriate. Mr. Brennan found me sitting in the church trying to decide what to do. He said he knew someone who could use help, someone who would not care about gossip because I am already an outcast, Ethan finished. I do not know what you are. Lydia turned back to the stove, stirring the pot with steady hands. I only know Mr. Brennan said you were fair, that if I worked hard and proved my worth, you would judge me on that rather than on lies someone else told. Ethan moved to the table, suddenly aware of how tired he was. The hermit rancher who lives alone in the hills. Something like that. He pulled out a chair and sat down, his legs aching. He should tell her to leave, should take her back to town first thing in the morning and have words with Sam Brennan about boundaries and assumptions. But the cabin was warm. The smell of real food made his stomach clench with sudden hunger. And there was something in the way she held herself, that careful dignity despite everything. It made him hesitate. What is cooking? He asked instead. Lydia glanced at him, surprise evident in her eyes. Stew. I found potatoes and onions in your root cellar, and there was a bit of salt pork. The bread should be ready in about 10 minutes. And I made coffee if you want some. Coffee. Ethan had not had real coffee in weeks. He had been making do with roasted grain that tasted like dirt. She poured him a cup, brought it to the table. Her hands were steady now, he noticed. She had made her case and was waiting for judgment. He took a sip. It was strong, hot, and actually tasted like coffee. Something in his chest loosened slightly. You have been here 3 days, he asked. Yes, Lydia returned to the stove. I cleaned, organized what supplies you had, fixed the latch on the root cellar door, It was hanging loose. Mended the hole in your spare shirt. Fed the chickens and milked the cow. I found your shotgun in the corner and kept it loaded in case the rustlers came back. Ethan's eyebrows rose. You know how to handle a gun? My father taught me, Poirot. We had a farm in Pennsylvania before. She trailed off. Before we lost it, he believed women should know how to protect themselves. Smart man. He was. Her voice went soft. He died 4 years ago. My mother a year after that. That is when I started corresponding with Mr. Whitmore. I thought, she paused, I thought I was building a new life. Instead, she had traded one loss for another. Ethan understood that kind of hope and the way it could shatter against reality. He drank his coffee in silence, watching her move around his kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had worked hard all her life. She was not delicate or decorative. She was capable. And she was here because a man had lied about her and a town had been all too willing to believe the worst. Just like they had been willing to believe the worst about a scarred veteran who wanted to be left alone. How old are you? He asked. 24. She pulled the bread from the oven, actual bread, golden and steaming. You? 33. He paused. I fought in the war, Virginia mostly. When I came back, there was not anything left to come back to, so I came here instead. It was more than he usually told anyone. But if she was going to be under his roof, and he was realizing he was going to let her stay at least for now, she deserved to know what kind of man she was dealing with. Did you kill people? The question was direct, her eyes steady on his face. Yes. He did not look away. A lot of people. That is what war is. Do you regret it? Every day. His voice was flat. But regret does not change what happened. It just means I remember. Lydia nodded slowly, then began ladling stew into bowls. She brought one to him, then fetched her own and sat down across the table. Not at the far end, not hovering nervously, just sitting, like a person. I need to be clear about something, Ethan said. If you stay here, it is as a housekeeper. Nothing else. You will have the cabin. I will sleep in the barn. You do not have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. Your reputation is already damaged. I will not make it worse. Anyone asks, you work for me. That is all. And if that is not acceptable, I will take you back to town and we will figure out something else. Lydia looked at him for a long moment. Why would you do that? Sleep in the barn, I mean. You do not know me. Because it is the right thing to do. Ethan picked up his spoon. And because I know what it is like when people decide who you are without bothering to find out the truth. Her eyes shimmered slightly, but she blinked it back. Thank you. He grunted and focused on his food. The stew was good. Really good. Better than anything he had cooked in months. Potatoes soft enough to melt. The salt pork flavored with herbs he did not know he had. Everything seasoned properly. They ate in silence for a while. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The temperature would drop hard tonight. The barn would be cold, but he had survived worse. That night, as Ethan lay in the barn loft, wrapped against the cold, he stared up at the dark rafters and thought about the woman in his cabin. Two outcasts under one roof. Maybe Sam Brennan was meddling. Or maybe for once someone had seen past the surface to the truth underneath. He would figure it out tomorrow. The next 3 weeks fell into a rhythm. Ethan rose before dawn, tended the livestock, then rode out to check fence lines or move cattle or hunt meat. Lydia kept the cabin, cooked the meals, and gradually transformed his chaotic, neglected homestead into something that functioned properly. She fixed the well pump in 2 days, reorganized his tack room so he could actually find things, started a sourdough starter from flour and water that produced bread, making his army hardtack seem like a distant nightmare. She collected eggs, milked the cow, and somehow coaxed his temperamental chickens into producing more consistently. In the evenings, they ate together at the table. Not much conversation at first. Both of them were too used to silence for easy small talk. But gradually, words began to fill the spaces. How did you learn to do that? He asked one night, watching her mend a torn coat with stitches so neat they were almost invisible. My mother was a seamstress before she married. Lydia did not look up from her work. She taught me. Said a woman should be able to make and mend anything she might need. She taught you well. She taught me to survive. There was no bitterness in it, just fact. That is what people like us do. We survive. People like us. Ethan heard the recognition in it. She knew what he was just as he was beginning to understand what she was. People who had been knocked down by life and had clawed their way back up through sheer stubborn will. Tell me about the war, she said a few nights later, after he had come in with snow melting in his hair. Why? Because you carry it. Her eyes met his, and I want to understand. So he told her. Not everything. Some things could not be put into words. But he told her about Virginia, about marching through the Shenandoah Valley, about watching boys younger than him die in mud and blood, about coming back to Ohio and finding his parents dead from fever. His sister married and moved to California, and nothing left that felt like home. I could not stay, he said quietly. Everything there was about who I had been before, and that person, he died in Virginia. I needed to go somewhere I could be whoever I was now. Lydia nodded slowly. That is why I agreed to marry Thomas Whitmore, not just because I needed security, but because I thought I could become someone new, someone who had not buried her parents, someone who had a future. Her laugh was soft and bitter. Instead, I found out you cannot outrun your past. It just follows you in different forms. Thomas Whitmore is an idiot. The words came out hard. And a coward. Yes. She bent back to her mending. But he won. He gets to keep his reputation, his comfortable life. I am the one who lost everything. Not everything. Ethan gestured at the cabin. You have got a place here. Work. A roof. For how long? The question was direct. Spring comes. Town starts talking more. How long before my presence here damages you instead of helping? It was a fair question. Ethan had been thinking about it himself. Do not know, he said honestly, but I am not Thomas Whitmore. I will not throw you out to protect my reputation. Even if it costs you, I have already been through the worst things I can imagine. His voice was flat. Town gossip does not even register. Something in her expression softened. Thank you, Ethan. He just nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. He had not done anything special. Just treated her like a human being instead of a problem to be solved or a scandal to be avoided. The fact that this counted as kindness said more about the world than it did about him. As the weeks passed, Ethan found himself noticing things about Lydia that had nothing to do with her work. The way she hummed softly while kneading bread, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed at something he said, the way she moved through his kitchen like she belonged there. One morning he came in from feeding the animals and stopped dead in the doorway. Lydia stood at the counter, rolling out pie dough, singing quietly to herself. Her voice was not trained, but it was clear and sweet. The melody was something old, something that tugged at memories he had buried years ago. She must have sensed him watching because she stopped mid-verse and turned. Color rose in her cheeks. Sorry, she said. I did not hear you come in. Do not stop on my account. Ethan moved to the stove to pour himself coffee. You have a nice voice. The color in her cheeks deepened. My mother used to sing that song. When I was little, she paused. I have not sung it in years. Being here, in a real kitchen again, it just came back to me. This is your kitchen, Ethan heard himself say, for as long as you want it. Lydia's eyes went bright for a moment. Then she turned back to her pie dough with a small smile. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than you know. That evening, Ethan found himself inventing reasons to stay in the cabin instead of retreating to the barn after supper. He helped her dry dishes, fixed a loose hinge on the cupboard door, asked her questions about her childhood on the farm in Pennsylvania. She told him about learning to ride before she could read, about her father's patience as he taught her to shoot and mend fences and judge when a storm was coming, about her mother's quiet strength as she ran the household and stretched every penny. They sound like good people, Ethan said. They were the best people I ever knew. Lydia's voice was soft with memory. Losing them, it was like losing the ground under my feet. Everything I thought I understood about how the world worked just disappeared. Ethan understood that feeling too well. The war did that to me, he said quietly. Made me question everything I thought I believed. About God, about country, about whether any of it meant anything at all. Did you find answers? No, he stared into the fire. But I found this land, this cabin. Work that has to be done whether I understand the meaning of it or not. And somewhere in the doing, I stopped asking questions and just started living. That is what I am trying to do now. Lydia looked at him across the table. Stop asking why everything happened the way it did, and just build something new. Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding that went deeper than words. A recognition of kindred spirits who had both learned that survival was not about understanding life. It was about showing up for it anyway. The moment stretched. Then Lydia looked away first, her cheeks flushed. I should get some sleep, she said. Early morning tomorrow. Right, Ethan stood abruptly. Me too. Good night, Lydia. Good night, Ethan. He retreated to the barn, his thoughts churning. What was happening to him? He had spent 10 years perfecting the art of not caring, not letting anyone close, not wanting anything he could not provide for himself. And now this woman with her steady hands and her wounded eyes was making him remember what it felt like to want something, to hope for something. It was dangerous. He knew it was dangerous. But as he lay in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, Ethan could not quite bring himself to care. The storm hit in the fourth week. Ethan had seen it coming. The sky turning that particular shade of gray-green that meant serious snow. He had spent 2 days moving his small herd closer to the ranch, checking shelters, hauling extra feed. It started as gentle flakes just after sunset. By midnight, the wind was howling and snow was falling so thick he could not see the barn from the cabin window. Lydia had insisted he sleep inside that night. It is too dangerous, she had said firmly. If something happens to you in the barn, I will not even know until morning. He had been too cold and tired to argue. The storm lasted 3 days. They were trapped inside together. The world beyond the cabin walls reduced to howling wind and driving snow. Ethan kept the fire going while Lydia cooked and rationed their supplies carefully. On the second day, cabin fever started to set in. Tell me something, Lydia said, staring at the same 4 walls they had been staring at for hours. Something? I do not know. Ethan looked up from the harness he was repairing. Like what? Anything. What did you want to be before the war? He paused, the question pulling up memories he rarely visited. Teacher, he said finally. I like books. Learning. I thought maybe I would teach in a small school somewhere. Why did you not? The war. He shrugged. And after, I could not imagine standing in front of children and pretending to have answers. Not after what I had seen. Lydia was quiet for a moment. My father wanted me to marry a farmer. Stay close to home. I wanted to see cities. Learn things. I read every book I could get my hands on. She smiled slightly. We used to argue about it. He said I had impractical dreams. Were they impractical? I do not know anymore. She looked at the fire. I did see a city, Philadelphia. It was big, loud, full of people who did not care if you lived or died. Then I came west and found out small towns could be just as cruel, just in different ways. People are people. Ethan set down the harness. Size of the place does not change what is in their hearts. Then what does? Nothing. His voice was hard. People are what they are. You just decide whether to let them in or keep them out. And you decided to keep everyone out. Seems safer. Was it? Lydia's eyes met his. Safer. Ethan opened his mouth to say yes, but the words stuck in his throat. Because he was sitting in a warm cabin, looking at a woman who had proven herself capable and trustworthy, and realizing that 3 weeks ago he had been eating cold beans from a can in the dark. Lonelier, he said instead. Yes, Lydia's smile was sad. It usually is. On the third day the storm broke. Ethan forced the door open against the drifted snow, stepping out into a world transformed. Everything was white and still. The sun brilliant against the snow, the air so cold it burned his lungs. He spent hours digging out paths to the barn, the chicken coop, the root cellar. His herd had scattered during the storm and it would take days to round them up again. But the animals in the barn were safe, and the cabin supplies had held out. That night, exhausted and aching, he came in to find Lydia had made venison stew with the last of the meat, had heated water for him to wash, had his spare clothes warming by the fire. You need to sleep inside again, she said, at least until the barn warms up. Lydia, I am not arguing about this. Her voice was firm. I did not keep you alive through the storm just so you could freeze to death in the barn. The bedroll stays by the fire. You stay in the cabin. That is final. He wanted to protest, wanted to maintain the boundaries they had established, but he was so tired, and the cabin was so warm, and the barn was a frozen hell right now. All right, he said, thank you. They fell into a new routine, Ethan by the fire, Lydia in the bed, a careful distance between them that felt less like propriety and more like respect, trust even. Two outcasts who had found an unexpected equilibrium. 6 weeks after Lydia's arrival, Ethan rode into Stillwater for supplies. He felt the stares as soon as he hitched his horse outside Brennan's general store. Conversation stopped. People looked away or looked too long. The town had apparently heard about his arrangement. Sam Brennan looked up from his counter as Ethan entered, his expression carefully neutral. Ethan, good to see you. Sam. Ethan pulled out his list. Need to stock up. Sure thing. Sam started pulling items from the shelves. How is everything at the ranch? Fine. Miss Moore working out all right. She is capable. Ethan's voice was flat. Anything else you want to know? Sam had the grace to look embarrassed. Look, I know you are probably mad about how I handled things. You sent a woman to a stranger's ranch without asking him first. Ethan's eyes were hard. Could have gone bad a lot of ways. I know, but I figured, well, you are not Thomas Whitmore, and she needed help, real help, not charity with conditions. Sam lowered his voice. Truth is, there was not anywhere else for her to go. The town made up its mind about her the moment Whitmore told his lies. Your place was the only option, because I am already a pariah, because you judge people on what they do, not what gossip says. Sam met his eyes. Was I wrong? Ethan wanted to stay angry, but Sam had a point. If Lydia had been sent to anyone else, there would have been expectations, conditions, or worse. His isolation had protected her as much as his fairness had. She stays as long as she wants, Ethan said. Anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. Fair enough. Sam finished packing the supplies. For what it is worth, I think you did a good thing. Was not trying to do good, just trying not to do harm. Outside, Ethan was loading his horse when he heard the voice he had been half expecting. Well, well, the hermit comes to town. Thomas Whitmore stood on the boardwalk, perfectly groomed as always, his suit pressed and his shoes polished. Everything about him gleamed with the kind of prosperity that had never known hardship. Ethan tied off the last bundle before turning around. Whitmore, I hear you have taken in a certain unfortunate woman. Thomas's smile was thin. Very charitable of you. Though I must say people are talking about what kind of services she might be providing in exchange for your charity. Ethan went very still. It was the same stillness that had preceded violence in the war. The stillness of a man deciding whether to pull a trigger. You want to repeat that? His voice was soft, dangerous. Thomas's smile faltered. I am simply saying you are a liar and a coward who ruins women's reputations to cover your own inadequacies. Ethan stepped closer. And now you are spreading more lies because it makes you feel big. Now see here. No, you see here. Ethan's eyes were ice. Lydia Moore is my employee. She works hard, keeps her word, and minds her business. That is more than I can say for a man who could not keep his word to a woman who traveled 2,000 miles based on his promises. She was not what I expected. Then you should have been honest instead of turning the whole town against her. Ethan's voice dropped even lower. You say one more word about her character. Spread one more lie, and we will settle this somewhere outside of town where there is no sheriff to get in the way. Understand? Thomas's face had gone pale. He took a step back, his hand rising defensively. There is no need for threats. It is not a threat. It is a promise. Ethan turned back to his horse. Stay away from my ranch. Stay away from her. And keep my name out of your mouth. He rode out of town with his supplies, aware of the eyes watching him go. Let them watch. Let them talk. He had stopped caring about public opinion in a muddy field in Virginia. But as he rode back toward the ranch, something had shifted in his chest. An awareness he had been pushing away for weeks. He had defended Lydia's honor, not just because it was right, but because the lies about her made him angry in a way that felt personal. When he crested the last hill and saw his cabin below, smoke rising from the chimney, he felt something he had not felt in years, like he was coming home. Lydia was at the table mending socks when he came in, arms loaded with supplies. She looked up and her face brightened. "You made it back before dark. I was starting to worry." Then she saw his expression. "What happened?" Ethan set down the supplies, began unpacking them methodically. "Ran into Thomas Whitmore. Had words." "Oh." Her hand stilled on the sock. "What kind of words?" "The kind that made it clear he is to leave you alone." He paused, then added, "And that if he spreads any more lies, we will have a different kind of conversation." Lydia was quiet for a long moment. "You threatened him?" "Yes, because of me. Because he is a lying bastard who deserves it." Ethan pulled out coffee, flour, sugar, "And because no one should get away with what he did to you." "Ethan," her voice was soft, "you did not have to do that. I am used to people talking." "Well, I am not." He finally looked at her. "You work hard. You keep your word. You have made this place actually livable. That is what matters. Not gossip, not lies, not some coward's attempt to protect his reputation." Her eyes were bright, but she blinked rapidly and looked back down at her mending. "Thank you. Do not have to thank me for basic decency." "Yes," she said quietly, "I do, because it is rarer than you think." They finished the unpacking in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now, the kind that came from understanding. That night, as Ethan settled into his bedroll by the fire and Lydia blew out the lamp, he stared at the ceiling and acknowledged the truth he had been avoiding. Somewhere in the past 6 weeks, this arrangement had stopped being temporary, had stopped being just practical. Lydia Moore had become part of his life in ways he had not intended or expected. Her presence steadied him. Her quiet competence made the work easier. Her occasional laugh, rare but genuine, made the isolation feel less like a prison. He did not know what to do with these feelings, did not trust them. The war had taught him that anything you cared about could be taken away, and the years since had reinforced that lesson. But as he drifted towards sleep, listening to the fire crackle and the wind outside, Ethan could not deny what was growing in the space between them. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Spring came slowly to Montana, melting the snow in patches and turning the frozen ground to mud. The days grew longer, the work more demanding. Ethan spent dawn to dusk checking his scattered herd, mending winter-damaged fences, preparing the land for the season ahead. Lydia transformed the neglected garden plot into neat rows of potential. Her hands dark with soil as she planted seeds saved from last year's harvest that Ethan had never bothered to use. They worked in parallel orbits, separate but connected, like two planets held by the same sun. "I am riding to the north pasture," Ethan said one morning in late March, checking his rifle at the door. "Will not be back until tomorrow. Rustlers hit the Morrison place last week. Need to make sure our herd is accounted for." Lydia looked up from the bread dough she was kneading, concern flickering across her face. "Alone?" "Always do it alone." That was before rustlers were active again. She wiped flour from her hands. "What if something happens?" "Then you will figure it out." But he softened it with, "You have got the shotgun. Keep it close. Anyone comes by who is not me, do not open the door." "Ethan, I will be fine." "Lydia." He left her standing in the doorway, the morning light catching in her dark hair, her expression troubled. Something in his chest tightened at the sight, but he pushed it away and mounted his horse. The north pasture was a half-day's ride through rough country. Ethan found his cattle scattered but whole. No signs of rustlers. He made camp in a stand of pine, built a small fire, and ate the cold biscuits and jerky Lydia had packed for him. The stars came out thick and bright, the way they only did in country this empty. He had grown used to nights like this over the years, just him and the dark and the endless sky. It had felt like freedom once, like escape from everything that haunted him. Tonight it just felt lonely. He thought about the cabin 15 miles south, about the warm light that would be glowing in the windows, about Lydia probably sitting at the table with her mending or one of the books she had brought from Philadelphia, about how the place had stopped feeling like just a shelter and started feeling like something more. When had that happened? He could not pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe it had been gradual. The accumulation of shared meals and quiet conversations and small kindnesses that built into something he did not have a name for. Or maybe it had been that morning, 2 weeks ago, when he had come in from feeding the animals and found her singing softly while she worked, her voice carrying a melody that made his chest ache with recognition of beauty he thought he had forgotten how to see. He had stood in the doorway just listening, not wanting to break the spell. When she had turned and caught him watching, she had flushed and gone quiet. But she had smiled too. She and pleased. And he had realized with sudden clarity that she was happy here. That somehow, against all odds, they had both found something neither of them had been looking for. Ethan lay back against his saddle, staring up at the infinite dark, and admitted the truth he had been avoiding for weeks. He was falling in love with Lydia Moore. The thought should have terrified him, should have sent him running the way he had run from everything else that mattered. But instead it settled into his bones with a strange kind of certainty, like something that had always been waiting there. He did not know if she felt the same, did not know if she could. Given everything that had happened to her, she had been betrayed, humiliated, cast aside. Why would she trust another man, especially one as damaged and difficult as him? But sometimes he caught her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. And sometimes when their hands accidentally brushed, reaching for the same thing, she did not pull away as quickly as she might have. Maybe, just maybe. Ethan closed his eyes, let the sounds of the night settle around him, and allowed himself to imagine a future he had stopped believing in years ago. He made it back to the ranch by mid-afternoon the next day. The moment he crested the final ridge, something felt wrong. The cabin door stood open, not just unlatched, fully open, swinging slightly in the wind. Ethan's hand went to his rifle as he urged his horse into a gallop, his heart hammering against his ribs, his mind racing through possibilities, each worse than the last. He hit the ground running, rifle up, and charged through the door. The cabin was empty, neat and tidy as always, the fire banked in the stove, the table set for supper. But no Lydia. Lydia. His voice cracked on her name. No answer. He spun, checking every corner, his breathing ragged with rising panic. The shotgun was missing from its place by the door. Her coat was gone, but there was no sign of struggle, no blood, no a sound from outside. Ethan wheeled toward the door just as Lydia came around the corner of the cabin, the shotgun in her hands, and a dead rabbit hanging from her belt. They stared at each other for one frozen moment. Then Ethan was moving, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He did not think about it, did not plan it, just pulled her against him, rifle and shotgun and rabbit and all, holding her tight enough to feel her heart beating against his chest. I thought, his voice was rough. The door was open. I thought, I am sorry. Lydia's words were muffled against his shoulder. I saw a rabbit near the garden. I did not think. I am sorry. Ethan pulled back enough to look at her face, his hand still gripping her shoulders. Do not do that again. Do not scare me like that. I will not. Her eyes were wide, searching his face. Ethan, I did not know you would. I did not think it would matter so much. It matters. The words came out harder than he intended. You matter. Something shifted in her expression. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. She reached up slowly, her hand touching his face, her palm warm against his bearded cheek. You matter too, she said softly. They stood like that for a long moment, the spring wind moving around them, the afternoon sun slanting across the mountains. Ethan wanted to kiss her. Wanted it so badly his hands shook with the restraint of not doing it. But she had been hurt by a man who had wanted things from her without offering anything real in return. He would not be that man, would not take what she had not freely chosen to give. So he stepped back carefully, tried to get his breathing under control. Good shot, he said, nodding at the rabbit. Lydia's smile was tremulous. My father taught me. He taught you well. Ethan picked up his rifle from where he had dropped it. I will skin it for supper. They moved through the familiar routines of evening, Ethan cleaning the rabbit, Lydia preparing the rest of the meal. Both of them carefully not talking about what had just happened. But the air between them felt different now, charged with possibility and things unsaid. At supper, Lydia finally broke the silence. When you came back and the door was open, she said quietly, what did you think happened? Ethan set down his fork. that rustlers had come, that someone had hurt you, that I had failed to keep you safe. Why would that be your failure? Because you are under my roof, my responsibility. Is that what I am? Her eyes held his. A responsibility? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan could have deflected, could have retreated behind the safe walls he had built over the years. Instead, he chose truth. No, he said, you are not. Then what am I? Or maybe he wanted to tell her, wanted to lay out everything he had been feeling in words that would make sense. But the words would not come, locked behind years of silence and self-protection. Lydia seemed to understand. She reached across the table, her hand covering his, her touch gentle but sure. It is all right, she said. We do not have to name it yet. The relief that flooded through him was almost painful. She knew. She saw what was happening between them, and she was not running. That night, as Ethan lay in his bedroll by the fire, he heard Lydia's voice from the darkness of the bedroom. Ethan? Yeah. I am glad you came back safe. Me too, he paused. Lydia, yes, I am glad you are here. The silence that followed was warm, comfortable. The silence of two people who had said what needed saying, even if they had not said everything yet. In the days that followed, something unspoken but undeniable wove itself through their daily lives. Ethan found himself inventing reasons to work closer to the cabin. Lydia started bringing him coffee in the barn, staying to talk while he worked. Their hands touched more often, passing dishes, reaching for tools, small contacts that sent warmth spreading through Ethan's chest. One afternoon, while Ethan was fixing a broken fence post, Lydia came out to the pasture with water and bread. She sat on a nearby rock watching him work, her skirts pulling around her in the grass. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. Ethan drove the post deeper into the ground. Why did you really let me stay that first night? She tilted her head. You could have taken me back to town, found another solution. Ethan straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. The honest answer felt dangerous, but she deserved it. Because when you said you had nowhere else to go, he said slowly, I knew exactly what that felt like. And because, he paused, searching for the right words, because you did not look at me like I was broken. You just looked at me like I was a person. You are a person. Lydia's voice was fierce. What happened to you in the war? What you have been through? None of that makes you less than whole. Most people do not see it that way. Then most people are fools. She stood, crossing to him. You are one of the best men I have ever met, Ethan Cole. You are honest and fair and kind, even when you pretend not to be. And She stopped herself, color rising in her cheeks. You what? His voice came out rough. I am grateful, she finished, but they both knew that was not what she had been about to say. Ethan set down his tools, his hands finding her shoulders again the way they had the day she had scared him. This close he could see flecks of gold in her hazel eyes, could smell the soap she used, could feel her breath warm against his throat. Lydia, he said, I need to tell you something. All right, I am not good with words, never have been, and I have got more scars than any person should have to carry. He drew a breath. But you make this place feel like a home instead of just a house. You make me remember what it is like to want to come back at the end of the day. And Thunder rumbled in the distance. They both looked up at the sky, watching dark clouds build over the mountains. Storm is coming, Ethan said. Big one looks like. They worked quickly, securing tools and bringing the animals in close. By the time they made it back to the cabin, the first drops were falling fat and heavy. Within minutes, it became a downpour. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the walls. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in an hour, and hail began mixing with the rain, pounding against the roof like drums. The herd, Ethan said, staring out the window at the deluge. They are scattered in the draws. If the creek floods, you cannot go out in this. Lydia grabbed his arm as he reached for his coat. You will be killed. If I do not, I will lose half my cattle. That is my entire investment, Lydia. Without them, this ranch fails. Then we will rebuild. Her grip tightened. But I will not let you ride into a storm that could kill you. It is not your choice. Yes, it is. Her eyes blazed. Because if you die out there, what am I supposed to do? Go back to town? Back to being alone? Back to... Her voice broke. Please, please do not go. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, the desperation in her grip, the way her whole body was shaking, and he realized with sudden terrible clarity that she had already lost too much. Her parents, her future, her reputation, her security. She had been abandoned by everyone who should have protected her. He could not do that to her too. All right, he said quietly, I will stay. The relief on her face nearly undid him. She released his arm, stepping back, her hand rising to cover her mouth. I am sorry, she whispered. I know those cattle matter. I know I am asking you to risk everything. But I cannot lose you too, Lydia. Ethan closed the distance between them again, his hands gentle on her face. Listen to me, the cattle matter. But they are just animals. They can be replaced. His voice dropped. You cannot. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. What am I to you, Ethan? Because I need to know. I need to understand what is happening between us before I make an even bigger fool of myself. The storm raged outside. Lightning illuminated the cabin in flashes of stark white. And Ethan finally said the words he had been holding back. I love you. Simple, direct, true. I did not mean to, did not plan it, but somewhere between you, cooking in my kitchen and fixing my well pump and making this place feel alive again, I fell in love with you. Lydia's breath caught. You love me? Yes, even though I come with gossip and scandal and a ruined reputation. I do not give a damn about any of that. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. You are brave and strong, and you make me want to be better than I am. That is what matters. I love you too. The words tumbled out of her. I think I have for weeks, but I was afraid to admit it. Afraid you would send me away. Afraid you would think I was just grateful or desperate or... He kissed her. Not carefully, not tentatively, but with all the pent-up longing of months of restraint. His hands slid into her hair, pins scattering, and she made a sound low in her throat that sent heat flooding through him. Her arms came around his neck, her body pressing against his. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan felt whole. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lydia's lips were swollen, and her hair was a disaster, and she had never looked more beautiful. We should talk about this, she said, though her hands were still fisted in his shirt, about what it means, about expectations. He kissed her again, softer this time. It means I want you to stay, not as a housekeeper, not as hired help, but as, he struggled for the right word, as yours, she finished, and you as mine. Yes. The storm continued its assault on the cabin, but inside warmth spread through every corner. They sat together on the floor by the fire, Lydia tucked against Ethan's side, his arm around her shoulders. Tell me something, she said eventually. What did you think the first time you saw me? Ethan huffed a laugh. That you were either very brave or very foolish to be cooking in a stranger's cabin. Both, probably, she smiled. I thought you were going to shoot me. Considered it for about 5 seconds. What changed your mind? The fact that you were not afraid? He stroked her hair absently. You were exhausted and desperate, but you were not afraid. That took courage. Or stupidity. No, courage. He tilted her face up to his. You are the bravest person I know, Lydia. You lost everything and kept going. That is not weakness. That is strength. She kissed him softly. We are both stronger than we thought we were. Together, he agreed. We are stronger together. Dawn came gray and turbulent. The rain had slowed but not stopped. Ethan stood at the window looking out at the flooded landscape with a sinking feeling in his gut. I have to check the damage, he said. Lydia came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. Then we will check it together. They saddled both horses. Lydia had been practicing riding over the past weeks and headed out into the aftermath. The creek had indeed flooded, jumping its banks and turning the valley bottom into a muddy lake. Fence posts had washed away. Trees had come down across paths, and the cattle were scattered to hell and gone. It took them 3 days to assess the damage and round up what was left of the herd. They lost 11 head, washed away in the flood, or killed by falling debris or simply disappeared into the mountains. For a small operation like Ethan's, it was a devastating loss. On the third evening, as they rode back to the cabin, exhausted and covered in mud, Lydia spoke quietly. How bad is it financially? Ethan had been running the numbers in his head all day. Bad. Those cattle represented half my capital. Without them, I cannot make my loan payment. Bank will probably start foreclosure proceedings by fall. There has to be something we can do. Not much, unless money falls from the sky. He tried to keep the bitterness out of his voice and failed. Might have to sell the place. Find work somewhere else. No. Lydia's voice was fierce. This is your home. Our home. We will find another way. Lydia, there is no other way. I am not a miracle worker. But we are two people now instead of one. She pulled her horse up, forcing him to stop too. Two people working, planning, thinking. That has to count for something. He wanted to believe her, wanted to hope the way she seemed to. But he had learned the hard way that hope was a luxury for people who had not watched everything they cared about burn. Still looking at her mud-stained face and determined eyes, he could not quite bring himself to crush that hope completely. We will figure something out, he said, though he did not believe it. That night, too tired to pretend anymore, Ethan did not even attempt to set up his bedroll by the fire. He simply followed Lydia to the bedroom. And she did not protest when he lay down beside her, both of them fully clothed and too exhausted for anything but sleep. But as he drifted off, Lydia's hand found his in the darkness. Whatever happens, she whispered, we face it together. Ethan squeezed her hand, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. Together, it was such a small word for such an enormous shift in how he saw the world. But maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The week after the flood, Ethan rode to town with a knot in his stomach that had nothing to do with the rough trail. He had put off this visit as long as possible, but the bank would not wait forever. Lawrence Henderson, who ran the First Montana Bank from a cramped office above the Mercantile, had financed Ethan's land purchase 6 years ago and held the note on his cattle operation. Ethan had never missed a payment until now. Henderson's office smelled like leather and tobacco. The banker looked up from his ledger as Ethan entered, his expression already skeptical behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Cole, I wondered when you would show up. Henderson gestured to a chair. Heard about the flood, bad business. Lost 11 head. Ethan sat, his hat in his hands. More if some do not recover from exposure. I cannot make the full payment this quarter. Henderson's mouth tightened. You are 3 months behind as of next week. That puts you in default. I know what it puts me. I am asking for an extension. Give me until fall. I can rebuild the herd, sell at better prices after summer grazing. And if another disaster hits, another storm, more rustlers, a disease outbreak? Henderson shook his head. You are a single man on a struggling ranch, Cole. You have got no backup, no reserves. This flood just proved you are a bad risk. I have never missed a payment in 6 years until now. Henderson pulled out a file, flipped it open. I have got obligations too, investors who expect returns. I cannot extend credit to someone who cannot demonstrate stability. Ethan's hands tightened on his hat brim. What are you saying? I am saying I want the full amount by end of summer. August 15th. Miss that deadline and I foreclose. Henderson's voice was not cruel, just businesslike. I am sorry, Cole, but this is how it has to be. The ride back to the ranch took twice as long as usual. Ethan kept his horse to a walk, trying to think through options that did not exist. He could sell everything, tools, horses, personal belongings, and maybe scrape together half of what he owed. Could try to find work in town. But who would hire a hermit rancher with no skills beyond cattle and survival? Could give up entirely. Walk away, start over somewhere else with nothing but the clothes on his back. Except he was not alone anymore. And the thought of telling Lydia he had failed, that he could not protect even this small piece of ground they had claimed together, made something crack in his chest. Lydia was in the garden when he got home, her sleeves rolled up and dirt under her fingernails. She looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, and her smile faded when she saw his face. What happened? Ethan dismounted, tied off his horse. The words felt like ground glass in his throat. Henderson wants full payment by mid-August. If I cannot pay, he forecloses. Can we make it if we are careful? No, the word was flat, not even close. We would need to replace every head we lost and sell them at premium prices. It is not possible. Lydia wiped her hands on her apron, walked over to him. Then we find another way. There is no other way. Frustration bled into his voice. I have been running numbers in my head all the way back. We are finished, Lydia. I failed. You did not fail. A flood happened. That is not failure. That is life. She took his hands, forced him to look at her. And we still have 3 months. That is not nothing. It is not enough. Maybe not for miracles, her grip tightened, but it is enough to try. That night, Lydia made stew from the last of the salt pork and potatoes. They ate in silence, the weight of the bank's ultimatum pressing down like physical force. After they had washed the dishes, Lydia pulled out paper and a pencil. Tell me everything we have, she said. Animals, tools, supplies, everything. Lydia, tell me. Her voice was firm. We cannot solve this if we do not know what we are working with. So Ethan told her. 34 cattle left in the herd, 6 chickens, 1 milk cow, 2 horses, a wagon that needed a new axle, tools for ranching and basic carpentry, seeds in the root cellar, his army rifle and Lydia's shotgun, the cabin and land itself, though, that would revert to the bank if he could not pay. Lydia wrote it all down, her brow furrowed in concentration. What about skills? What can we do that might bring in money? I can ranch, break horses if I had any to break. Build things, I guess? He shrugged. That is about it. I can sew, cook, preserve food. Keep books. Lydia tapped the pencil against her lips. What if we sold butter and eggs in town? I could make cheese too, if we increase the milk cow's production. That is pennies, Lydia. We need hundreds of dollars. Pennies add up. She kept writing. What about the garden? We could grow more than we need, sell the surplus, and I could take in mending. Maybe sewing projects. No. Ethan's voice came out harder than he meant. You are not going to kill yourself with extra work just to save a failing ranch. Lydia set down the pencil, her eyes sharp. This is not just your ranch anymore, Ethan. It is ours. That means we both work to save it. I will not let you sacrifice yourself for my mistakes. Your mistakes? She stood up, anger flashing across her face. You bought this land. You built this cabin. You survived alone for years when most men would have given up or gone crazy. None of that is a mistake. The only mistake would be giving up now without even trying. We cannot win this. The words felt like surrender, like admitting defeat on a battlefield he had thought he could hold. Maybe not. Lydia came around the table, her hands framing his face with a gentleness that made his chest ache. But I would rather lose fighting beside you than win anywhere else. Something in Ethan's throat closed up. He pulled her against him, buried his face in her hair, and let himself be held by someone who saw him as worth saving. I love you, he said roughly. Even if I lose everything else, I need you to know that. I know. Lydia's arms tightened around him. And you are not going to lose me. Whatever happens with the ranch, we will still have each other. It should have been enough. In a better world, it would have been. But Ethan had learned the hard way that love did not pay debts or stop foreclosures or protect people from the harsh realities of frontier economics. Still that night, he held her close and let himself believe, just for a few hours, that maybe wanting something badly enough could make it real. 2 weeks into their desperate push, Sam Brennan showed up at the ranch with his wagon loaded with supplies. Heard about the flood, Sam said, climbing down. Thought you might need some things. Ethan eyed the supplies warily. Cannot afford charity, Sam. Not charity. Credit. Sam started unloading flour, coffee, nails. You can pay me back when you sell your cattle in fall. No interest, Sam. I know what Henderson told you. Sam's voice was quiet. Whole town knows. Some folks are taking bets on whether you will make it. And you, I am betting on you. Sam met his eyes. You and Miss Moore. Separately, you are both tough. Together, he smiled slightly. Together, you might just be stubborn enough to pull it off. Lydia came out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw the supplies, her eyes went bright with something that might have been tears. Thank you, she said simply. Sam nodded. Town is not all bad, Miss Moore. Some of us remember what it is like to need help, and some of us recognize hard work when we see it. He climbed back onto his wagon. I will be back in a month. You need anything before then, you send word. As Sam's wagon disappeared down the trail, Ethan felt something shift in his chest. They were not as alone as he had thought. The world had not completely turned its back on them. But that small comfort evaporated 3 days later when rustlers hit again. Ethan had been checking the south pasture at dawn when he heard the gunshots. He spurred his horse into a gallop, rifle already in his hands, adrenaline singing through his veins the way it had in the war. He crested a rise and saw them, 4 men driving a dozen of his cattle toward the tree line, without thinking, without planning. Ethan charged down the slope. "Get away from my herd!" His voice cracked like a whip across the valley. The rustlers turned. One of them raised a rifle. Ethan saw the muzzle flash, heard the bullet whine past his head. His horse screamed and reared. The world tilted sideways. Then he was falling, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. His horse bolted. The rustlers fired again, bullets kicking up dirt inches from his face. Ethan rolled, brought his rifle up, fired twice. One of the rustlers clutched his shoulder and fell from his saddle. The others wheeled their horses, shouting at each other. Apparently, one wounded man was enough to make them reconsider. They abandoned the cattle and rode hard for the mountains, leaving their injured companion behind. Ethan got to his feet, his ribs screaming where he had landed on a rock. The wounded rustler was trying to drag himself toward his horse. Ethan walked over, planted his boot on the man's back. "Try to move, and I will shoot you in the spine." His voice was empty of emotion, the same tone he had used in the war when taking prisoners. "Who sent you?" "Go to hell." The rustler spat blood. Ethan pressed his boot down harder. "I asked a question. Nobody sent us. We just—" The man gasped. "We just take what we can. You have been hitting ranches all spring. Someone is organizing you." Ethan cocked his rifle. Last chance. The rustler's resistance crumbled. "There is a guy calls himself Morrison. He tells us which ranches to hit, gives us a cut of the sale price when we move the cattle east." Morrison. Ethan knew the name. A neighboring rancher who had supposedly lost cattle to rustlers himself. Apparently that had been cover. "Where do you take them?" "Holding pen 10 miles northeast in the canyon country. Morrison sells them to buyers from Wyoming who do not ask questions." Ethan memorized the location, then hauled the rustler to his feet. "You are going to tell this to the sheriff, and you are going to testify about Morrison. He will kill me. Then you had better hope the sheriff offers protection, because if you do not cooperate, I will kill you myself." It took 2 hours to get the wounded rustler to town and turn him over to Sheriff Dawes, a tired man in his 50s who had seen too much of human nature to be surprised by anything. When Ethan explained about Morrison, the sheriff's expression darkened. "I will handle it," he said. "We will get your cattle back, Cole, and Morrison will answer for this." Ethan nodded, too exhausted and angry to feel satisfaction. He just wanted to go home, wanted to see Lydia and know she was safe, and maybe sleep for a week. But when he finally made it back to the ranch, riding double on a borrowed horse since his own was still missing, he found Lydia waiting on the porch with the shotgun across her knees and murder in her eyes. "Where the hell have you been?" She stood as he dismounted, her whole body vibrating with fury. "I heard shots. You did not come back. I thought—" Her voice broke. "I thought you were dead." "I am sorry." Ethan climbed the porch steps, every movement painful. Rustlers hit the herd. I went after them. One of them shot at me. My horse bolted. You went after armed rustlers alone." Lydia's voice was dangerously quiet. "You could have been killed. But I was not. That is not that point." She set down the shotgun, her hands shaking. "You promised me. After the storm, you promised we would face things together. And the first time something dangerous happens, you ride off alone like I do not exist." The accusation hit harder than any bullet. Ethan had spent so many years operating alone, making decisions without considering anyone else, that he had fallen back into old patterns without thinking. "You are right," he said quietly. "I am sorry. I do not want your apology. I want your trust." Lydia's eyes were wet. "I want you to remember that I am here, that you are not alone anymore, that if you die, it does not just affect you, it destroys me too." The rawness in her voice cut through his exhaustion and pain. He reached for her, pulling her against him despite his protesting ribs. I know, he said into her hair. I know, and I am sorry. I will do better. You had better. But her arms came around him, careful of his injuries. Because I meant what I said. We are partners. That means you do not get to play hero without me. They stood like that while the sun climbed higher. Two people learning how to be together after spending too long alone. 3 days later, Sheriff Dawes showed up with 22 head of cattle bearing Ethan's brand. Morrison had been arrested, his operation dismantled, and the stolen livestock returned to their rightful owners. That is everything we found with your mark, Dawes said. Morrison is looking at serious prison time. The territorial judge does not take kindly to organized theft. Ethan walked through the recovered cattle, checking them over. They were thinner than they should be, stressed from being moved and penned in unfamiliar territory. But they were alive. Combined with what he had not lost, he now had 56 head. It still was not enough for the bank payment, but it was closer than they had been yesterday. Thank you, Sheriff, he said. Dawes nodded. Just doing my job. Though I will admit, Cole, I am impressed. Most men would have backed down when Morrison's man pulled a gun. You did not even hesitate, could not afford to. Ethan's voice was dry. Those cattle are all that stands between me and foreclosure. Heard about that too. Dawes shifted in his saddle. For what it is worth, you have got friends in town. People who think Henderson is being too harsh. Might be some help available if you need it. I will keep that in mind. After the sheriff left, Ethan stood in the pasture watching his cattle graze. Lydia came out to join him, slipping her hand into his. We are getting closer, she said, not close enough. But for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt something that might have been cautious optimism. Though I will admit I did not think we would get this far. We are stubborn, Lydia smiled. And we are together, that counts for a lot. That night as they lay in bed with Lydia's head on his shoulder, Ethan finally let himself acknowledge the truth he had been avoiding. He had spent 10 years convinced he was better off alone. That isolation was safety. That not caring meant not being hurt, but having Lydia beside him. Working with him, believing in him even when he did not believe in himself. It had changed everything. If they lost the ranch, it would hurt, but it would not destroy him. Not as long as she was there. For the first time since the war, Ethan understood that survival and living were two different things. He had been surviving for a decade, but only in the past few months had he started actually living again. And that was worth fighting for. June arrived with heat that shimmered off the Montana plains and turned the grass golden. Ethan and Lydia worked from before sunrise until after dark. Every day a calculated push toward an impossible goal. The cattle grazed fat on summer grass, their condition improving daily. The garden burst with vegetables that Lydia harvested, preserved, and sold in town. Every penny they earned went into a tin box hidden under a floorboard in the bedroom, their collection growing with painful slowness. By mid-July, they had saved $240. They needed $600 by mid-August. Ethan sat at the table one evening, staring at the numbers he had written and rewritten until the paper was nearly worn through. No matter how he calculated it, they were going to fall short. We could sell the milk cow, Lydia said quietly from where she stood at the stove. That would bring maybe $30. Then we would have no milk, no butter, no cheese to sell. Ethan rubbed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. We would lose more income than we would gain. The wagon, then. We need the wagon to take cattle to market. His voice came out sharper than he intended. I am sorry, I cannot see a way through this. Lydia set down her spoon and came to sit beside him. She looked at the numbers, her expression troubled. What if we asked for help, she said. Sam offered. Maybe others would too. I am not taking charity. The words were automatic, a reflex born from years of refusing to be beholden to anyone. It would not be charity. It would be a loan. We would pay them back. With what? Ethan gestured at the paper. We can barely make the bank payment. Even if everything goes perfectly, how would we pay back loans on top of that? I do not know. Lydia's hand covered his. But I know giving up is not the answer. Before Ethan could respond, hoofbeats sounded outside. He moved to the window, his hand instinctively going to where his rifle leaned against the wall. In the fading light, he saw a figure dismounting. A woman in a dusty traveling dress, moving stiffly like she had been riding for days. Lydia opened the door before Ethan could stop her. The woman on the porch looked to be in her early 40s, with graying brown hair and eyes that reminded Ethan uncomfortably of someone he could not quite place. "I am looking for Ethan Cole," the woman said. Her voice was cultured, Eastern, completely out of place on this isolated ranch. "I am Cole." Ethan stepped into the doorway. "Who are you, Margaret Harrison?" The woman swayed slightly, catching herself on the porch rail. "I am your sister." The world tilted sideways. Ethan heard Lydia's sharp intake of breath, felt her hand on his arm, steadying him. His sister Margaret, who had married a lawyer and had moved to California before the war, who he had not seen in 15 years, who he had assumed had forgotten he existed. "Margaret," his voice sounded strange to his own ears. "What are you doing here? May I come in? I have been traveling for 3 weeks, and I am about to fall over." Lydia moved first, taking Margaret's arm and guiding her inside. Within minutes, she had settled the exhausted woman in a chair with water and bread, her competence cutting through Ethan's shock. Margaret drank deeply, then looked at Ethan with eyes that carried the weight of difficult news. "Our Aunt Beatrice died 2 months ago," she said. "Father's sister in Boston. You probably do not remember her." "I do not." Ethan's mind was still reeling. "Why does that bring you here?" "Because she left you something in her will." Margaret reached into her traveling bag, pulled out a letter sealed with wax, $500. She specified it was to go to you, not me. Her lawyer sent word to me in California since that was the last known address for the family. "It took me weeks to track you down." $500? Ethan stared at the letter like it might burst into flames. $500 was almost exactly what they needed. Why would she leave me anything? His voice came out rough. "I never even met her." "Because you fought in the war." Margaret's eyes were sad. "Her son, your cousin James, died at Gettysburg. She never got over it. In her will, she said any family member who had served deserved recognition for their sacrifice." She paused. She did not know our parents had died, did not know about California or Montana or any of it, just knew you had enlisted. Ethan took the letter with hands that were not quite steady. The paper felt heavy, substantial, real. "There is more," Margaret said. "I am not just here to deliver money. I am here because—" She glanced at Lydia, then back at Ethan. "Because I am sorry for leaving, for not writing, for letting you disappear after the war without trying to find you. You had your own life." The words came out flat. "You were my little brother." Margaret's voice broke slightly. "And I abandoned you when you needed family most. I have regretted it for years. When Aunt Beatrice's lawyer tracked me down, it felt like a chance to make amends. So I came." The silence stretched between them. 15 years of distance and hurt and loss filling the space. Ethan did not know what to say, did not know if he had the capacity to bridge that gap. Lydia, as usual, cut through the tension with practical grace. "You must be exhausted," she said to Margaret. "And hungry. Let me make you a proper meal. You can stay here tonight. Rest, and tomorrow we can all talk more clearly." Margaret's grateful smile transformed her tired face. "Thank you, miss." "Lydia Moore." Lydia's hand found Ethan's. "A subtle claim. Well, I suppose I am the woman who is going to marry your brother if he ever gets around to asking properly." Despite everything, Ethan felt his lips twitch toward a smile. Leave it to Lydia to announce their intentions to his long-lost sister as casually as commenting on the weather. Margaret's eyes widened, then softened. "Then I am very glad to meet you, Miss Moore. And I am glad my brother found someone who looks at him the way you do." That night, after they had fed Margaret and settled her in Ethan's old bedroll by the fire, Ethan and Lydia lay in the darkness of the bedroom, the letter resting on the small table beside them. "You should open it," Lydia whispered. "I know." But Ethan did not move. The money in that letter represented salvation. It also represented a past he had tried to leave behind, connections he had thought were severed, and the uncomfortable reality that he was not as alone in the world as he had believed. "Are you angry that your sister came?" "I do not know what I am." Ethan stared at the ceiling. "I spent 15 years convinced she had forgotten about me, that I did not matter to anyone from before. It was easier that way." "Easier than what?" "Than hoping someone might care." His voice was barely audible. "Hope hurts more than resignation." Lydia shifted closer, her head on his shoulder. Your sister traveled 3 weeks to find you. That is not nothing, Ethan. That is someone who cares, even if she made mistakes. I do not know if I can forgive her. You do not have to decide tonight. Lydia's hand rested over his heart. But maybe give her a chance to explain. Listen to what she has to say. When did you get so wise? I have always been wise. He could hear the smile in her voice. You were just too stubborn to notice. The next morning, Margaret woke early and found Ethan already outside tending the animals. She approached slowly, like someone trying not to spook a wild thing. You have built a good place here, she said. It is modest. Ethan continued forking hay, not looking at her. It is honest work. That is more than a lot of people can say. Margaret leaned against the fence rail. I need to explain something about why I did not write. You do not owe me explanations. Yes, I do. Her voice was firm. When you enlisted, I was already in California with Robert. We were building his law practice, starting our life. Then the war happened and everything fell apart. Robert died of typhoid in 1863. I was pregnant, alone, barely keeping myself fed. She paused. I got one letter from Mother saying you had survived the war. Then nothing. I wrote to the old address in Ohio, but the letters came back undeliverable. I tried to find you, Ethan, I swear I did. But without money for a detective, without any leads. Ethan finally looked at her. You had a child? A son. Daniel. He is 12 now. Margaret's smile was tired. I raised him on my own. Worked as a seamstress. Took in laundry. We survived. But I never stopped wondering what happened to you. If you were alive, if you hated me for leaving. I did not hate you, the words came slowly. I just stopped expecting anything from anyone. That is worse than hate. Margaret's eyes were wet. That is giving up. It is surviving. No, Ethan. It is hiding. She gestured toward the cabin. But I see you have stopped hiding now. That woman in there? Lydia, she looks at you like you hung the moon, and you look at her the same way. That is not survival. That is living. The truth in her words hit harder than Ethan expected. He set down the pitchfork, leaning against it. The money from Aunt Beatrice, he said. It comes at a time when I desperately need it. Almost too convenient. Life is like that sometimes. Margaret's smile was slight. Tragedy and grace all mixed together. You can accept it, or you can let pride get in the way. It is not pride. It is... He struggled for the words. I have made it this far on my own. Taking help feels like admitting I failed. You did not fail, you just hit circumstances beyond your control. Margaret stepped closer. And you are not on your own anymore. You have got Lydia. You have got me, if you will have me. And you have got money from an aunt who wanted to honor your service. That is not charity, Ethan. That is family taking care of family. Ethan looked toward the cabin where smoke was rising from the chimney as Lydia prepared breakfast. Family. He had spent so long without it that the word felt foreign. But maybe Margaret was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Stay for a few days, he said quietly. Meet Lydia properly. Let me get used to having a sister again. Margaret's smile broke through like sun after rain. I would like that. Over the next 3 days, Margaret became part of the rhythm of the ranch. She helped Lydia with the endless work of the garden and kitchen. Her hands remembering skills she had learned before her life had fractured. In the evenings, she told stories about their childhood that Ethan had half forgotten, and about her son Daniel, who wanted to be a lawyer like his father. Watching Lydia and Margaret work together, laughing over shared jokes and exchanging cooking techniques, Ethan felt something in his chest gradually unfold. This was what he had been missing without knowing it. Not just love, but connection, community, the knowledge that he was not alone against the world. On the third evening, Margaret approached him as he was checking the cattle. I need to leave tomorrow, she said. I have been away too long. Daniel is staying with friends, but I need to get back to him. I understand. Ethan did, though he was surprised to find he would miss her. Before I go, I want to say something. Margaret faced him squarely. You have got something good here, Ethan. Do not let it slip away because you are too proud or too scared to fight for it. Use Aunt Beatrice's money. Save your ranch. Build a life with Lydia. And for heaven's sake, marry that woman before she realizes she could do better. Despite himself, Ethan laughed. She already knows she could do better. She stays anyway. Then she is smarter than both of us combined. Margaret hugged him, fierce and quick. Write to me, let me know how things turn out. And if you need anything, anything at all, you send word to California. I will. Ethan returned the embrace awkwardly, unused to physical affection. Thank you, Margaret, for coming, for the money, for everything. That is what family does. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. We show up, even if it takes 15 years. After Margaret left the next morning, Ethan finally opened the letter from Aunt Beatrice's lawyer. Inside was a bank draft for $500 and a brief note in an elderly woman's shaking hand. For Ethan Cole, who served when his country needed him, use this to build something worthy of your sacrifice. Your cousin James would want you to have it. Ethan folded the note carefully, the weight of an unknown aunt's faith in him settling into his bones. Combined with their savings, they now had enough for the bank payment with a small margin left over. They were going to make it. We should celebrate, Lydia said that evening, reading the relief on his face. We have earned it. With what? We barely have food to spare. Then we celebrate with what we have. She pulled him to his feet, led him outside to where the sun was setting in brilliant orange and gold across the mountains. We have this view, this land, each other. That is enough. Ethan pulled her against him, his chin resting on top of her head. When this is over, when we have made the payment and the ranch is secure, I am going to marry you properly. Church, witnesses, the whole thing. You asking or telling? But he could hear the smile in her voice. Asking. He turned her to face him, went down on one knee right there in the grass. Lydia Moore, will you marry me? I cannot promise you luxury or ease, or anything beyond hard work in my complete devotion. But I love you and I want to build a life with you here on this land. Lydia's eyes were bright with tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He stood, kissed her with all the pent-up emotion of months of struggle and fear and hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Lydia laughed. Your sister was right, she said. You did take too long to ask properly. Better late than never. Much better. She kissed him again, softer this time. Now let us go inside and figure out exactly how we are going to spend the next month before the payment is due, because I want everything perfect. I want this ranch running so smoothly that Henderson cannot find a single thing to criticize. They spent the evening planning, their voices low and intimate, occasionally interrupted by kisses that grew more heated until they abandoned planning altogether for more immediate concerns. Later, lying tangled together in the darkness, Ethan listened to Lydia's steady breathing and marveled at how completely his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been alone, isolated, convinced he was better off without connections or complications. Now he had a partner, a sister who had found her way back to him, and a future that actually felt worth fighting for. The money from Aunt Beatrice had saved the ranch, but Lydia had saved him. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. They moved the cattle to the best grazing land, ensuring they would be in prime condition for sale. Lydia worked her garden to exhaustion, preserving everything they did not sell. Ethan repaired every fence, every building, every piece of equipment until the ranch gleamed with careful maintenance. When they were not working, they stole moments together. Quiet conversations in the evening, shared laughter over small jokes, kisses that promised everything words could not express. They talked about the future in concrete terms now, planning where to expand the cabin, how many children they wanted, what crops might grow well in the North Field. On August 10th, 5 days before the payment was due, disaster struck again. Ethan was working in the barn when he heard Lydia scream. He dropped everything and ran, his heart in his throat, remembering too vividly the day he had found the cabin door open and thought the worst. He found her in the garden, staring at plants that had been green and healthy that morning. Now they were wilting, leaves curling and turning black. What happened? He knelt beside her, touching the damaged plants. I do not know. Her voice shook. They were fine at breakfast. I came out after lunch and found them like this. Ethan examined the soil, the roots, the pattern of damage. His stomach sank. Blight. Some kind of disease. It is spreading. Can we stop it? Not if it is already this advanced. He stood, surveying the garden that represented hours of labor and a significant portion of their survival plans for winter. We will have to pull everything infected and burn it. Try to save what we can. They worked through the afternoon and into the night, pulling diseased plants and separating them from healthy ones. By dawn, they had lost more than half the garden. Weeks of work and anticipated income gone in less than a day. Lydia stood in the middle of the devastation, dirt under her nails and exhaustion in every line of her body. "This was supposed to be our buffer," she said quietly. "Extra money for winter, for emergencies. Now, now we make the payment and hope we can rebuild before winter." Ethan pulled her against him, feeling her shake with suppressed tears. "We will figure it out, Lydia. We always do. I am tired of figuring it out." Her voice was muffled against his chest. "I am tired of fighting for every inch of ground. I just want one thing to go smoothly. Just one thing." He had no answer for that because, she was right, it had been one battle after another since the day she had arrived. And he was tired too. Tired in his bones. Tired in ways that sleep could not fix. But giving up was not an option. Not when they had come this far. On August 15th, Ethan rode to town with $620 in his saddlebag. The extra 20 represented every spare penny they had left after selling butter, eggs, and the few salvaged garden vegetables. It was enough for the payment, but left them with nothing for emergencies or supplies. Lawrence Henderson counted the money twice, his expression giving nothing away. Finally, he made a notation in his ledger and looked up at Ethan. "This brings you current," he said. "Congratulations, Cole. I honestly did not think you would make it." "Neither did I." Ethan's voice was flat. "Do I have to worry about this happening again?" "That depends on whether you have another disaster." Henderson's tone was matter-of-fact. "You are a bad risk, Cole. That has not changed, but you have proven you can survive against odds. So I am willing to continue the loan. Just do not make me regret it." Ethan walked out of the bank feeling hollowed out. They had won. They had saved the ranch. But the victory felt fragile, temporary. One more flood, one more disaster, and they would be right back where they had started. He rode home slowly, dreading telling Lydia they had nothing left in reserve. But when he crested the final rise and saw the cabin below, saw smoke rising from the chimney and her figure moving in the garden, salvaging what remained, something in him settled. They had survived. That was enough for today. Tomorrow they would figure out the next challenge. Lydia met him at the door, reading the outcome in his face before he could speak. "It is done? It is done. Ranch is ours for another year." She sagged against the doorframe, relief and exhaustion warring on her face. Then she straightened, took his hand, and pulled him inside. "Then tonight," she said firmly, "we celebrate. We earned it." They ate the last of their preserved beef, the last good bread, and drank coffee that Ethan had been hoarding for a special occasion. They talked about small things, repairs needed before winter, plans for next spring's planting, the mare who might be pregnant. And later in the darkness of their bed, Lydia spoke the words that had been building in both of them for weeks. "Marry me tomorrow," she said. "What? Do not wait for church or witnesses or perfection. Just marry me tomorrow, Ethan." Her voice was fierce. "We have waited long enough. We have fought hard enough. I want to be your wife. Officially, permanently. I do not want to wait anymore." He pulled her close, his heart full to breaking. "Then tomorrow it is." They rode into Stillwater together at dawn, the August sun already promising heat that would shimmer off the dusty streets by noon. Lydia wore her best dress, the gray one she had arrived in, cleaned and mended until it looked almost new. Ethan had shaved and put on his only good shirt, the one Lydia had repaired so carefully that the torn seam was invisible. Neither of them had slept much. They had lain awake talking in whispers about everything and nothing, occasionally falling silent just to listen to each other breathe. Somewhere around midnight, Ethan had voiced the fear that had been gnawing at him. "What if you regret this?" he had asked. "Tying yourself to a man who almost lost everything, who still might." Lydia had rolled to face him, her hand cupping his bearded cheek. "I could ask you the same thing. What if you regret marrying a woman whose reputation was destroyed before she even got here? Who brings nothing but scandal and hard work? That is different." "No, it is not." Her voice had been fierce in the darkness. We are both damaged goods, Ethan Cole. Both of us carry scars and losses and reasons the world said we were not good enough. But together, she had paused. Together, we are exactly what we need to be. Now riding side by side down Stillwater's main street, Ethan felt the weight of those words settle into certainty. The town was waking up around them. Shopkeepers sweeping boardwalks, a few early risers heading to the mercantile, children chasing a dog between buildings. They tied their horses outside the church, a simple white building with a cross nailed above the door. Reverend Peters lived in a small house behind it, and they found him tending a scraggly vegetable garden that made Lydia's devastated plot look abundant by comparison. Mr. Cole, Peter straightened, surprise evident on his weathered face. He was a thin man in his 60s who had been circuit riding these territories for longer than Ethan had been alive. Miss Moore, what brings you to town so early? We want to get married, Ethan said. Today. Now, if you are willing. Peters looked between them, his expression sharpening with assessment. That is rather sudden. No, sir, Lydia said quietly. It is overdue. Something in her voice must have convinced him because Peters nodded slowly. You will need witnesses, 2 of them by territorial law. We will find them. Ethan glanced at the slowly waking town. How long do we have? Come back in an hour. That will give me time to prepare, and you time to round up your witnesses. Peter smiled slightly. And maybe get some breakfast. You both look like you have not eaten in days. They found Sam Brennan opening his store, and his face split into a genuine grin when Ethan explained their errand. About damn time, Sam said. I will stand witness. And I know just who to ask for the second. He disappeared into his store, returning moments later with a shawl. Give this to Miss Moore. It is not much, but a woman should have something pretty on her wedding day. Lydia took the shawl, soft blue wool with delicate embroidery along the edges, and her eyes went bright with tears. Sam, I cannot. You can and you will. Sam's voice was gruff. Consider it a wedding present. Now go on, I will meet you at the church in an hour. They walked through town as it continued to wake around them. Ethan felt the stares, heard the whispers. Thomas Whitmore emerged from the hotel and stopped dead when he saw them, his face going pale. But Ethan just nodded once and kept walking. Lydia's hand firm in his. Let them stare. Let them whisper. None of it mattered anymore. They found Sheriff Dawes at his office, and he agreed immediately to be the second witness. Seen a lot of marriages in my time, he said. Most of them were between people who thought love meant never facing hardship. You 2 already know what hardship looks like. That is a better foundation than most. With an hour to kill, they walked to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. Lydia leaned against a fence rail, the blue shawl draped around her shoulders, and looked out at the mountains in the distance. Are you nervous? She asked. Terrified. Ethan's honesty surprised him. Not of marrying you, of failing you, of not being enough. You are enough. Lydia turned to face him. You have always been enough, Ethan. The ranch, the money, all of it, that is just circumstance. Who you are, the man you have proven yourself to be, that is what matters. And that man is more than I ever hoped to find. He kissed her there on the edge of town with the morning sun warming their faces and the mountains bearing witness. When they pulled apart, Lydia was smiling. 1 hour, she said. Then I become Mrs. Ethan Cole. 1 hour, he agreed. Then we stop fighting alone and start building together. The church was small and plain, its interior cool and dim after the brightness outside. Reverend Peter stood at the front in his best black suit, a worn Bible in his hands. Sam Brennan and Sheriff Dawes waited in the front pew, both looking uncommonly serious. Ethan and Lydia walked down the aisle together. Neither willing to pretend this was a traditional ceremony. They had both come too far, survived too much, to play at conventions that did not fit their reality. Peters opened his Bible. But before he could begin, the church door opened behind them. Ethan turned to see a small group entering, women from town, their husbands, a few shopkeepers, Miss Patterson from the boarding house, even Henderson from the bank looking vaguely uncomfortable but present nonetheless. Word spread, Sam said quietly. Folks wanted to see this, if you do not mind. Ethan looked at Lydia, saw her surprise mirror his own. She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. We do not mind, Ethan said. The ceremony was simple. Peter spoke about commitment and partnership, about choosing to build a life together in the face of an uncertain world. He did not mention love as some abstract ideal, but as a daily decision to show up, work hard, and honor the promises made. When he asked Ethan if he would take Lydia as his wife, Ethan's voice was steady and sure. I will, for as long as we both live. When Lydia was asked the same, her answer came without hesitation. I will, in hardship and in hope. They had no rings. That expense was beyond them. So they exchanged promises instead. Ethan took Lydia's work, roughened hands in his, and spoke words he had never planned, but that felt carved from his bones. I promise to see you, not as you were, not as anyone else says you are, but as you truly are, brave and strong and worthy of everything good this world can offer. I promise to fight beside you, not for you, and I promise that whatever comes, you will never face it alone. Lydia's voice shook slightly as she responded, but her words were clear. I promise to see you too, not as a broken soldier or a failed rancher or any of the things you have been called, but as the man who took me in when no one else would, who fought for us when I had almost given up fighting, who showed me that damage does not mean destroyed, and that starting over can lead somewhere worth arriving. I promise to build with you, dream with you, and remind you every day that you are enough. Peter smiled, closed his Bible. By the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was soft, reverent, full of promise. When they turned to face the gathered witnesses, Ethan saw tears on more than one weathered face. Sam was grinning like he had won a bet. Even Henderson looked vaguely pleased. Outside in the bright morning sunlight, people came forward with small gifts, a jar of honey, a sack of flour, a bundle of candles. Miss Patterson, who had thrown Lydia out of her boarding house months ago, who approached with her head down. I was wrong about you, she said quietly to Lydia. I believed lies I should have questioned. I am sorry. Lydia's expression was complex, hurt still visible beneath hard-won grace. Thank you for saying so. You have built something good with Mr. Cole. Everyone can see it. Mrs. Patterson pressed a small package into Lydia's hands. It is not much, just some fabric, but I thought you might like it. After she had moved away, Lydia unwrapped the package to reveal several yards of good cotton cloth in a soft green. Enough to make a new dress, maybe two. People are strange, she murmured. People are people, Ethan said. They follow the crowd until someone gives them permission not to. I guess we gave them permission. Sam Brennan approached with a picnic basket. Wedding breakfast, he announced. My wife made it special. You two go find somewhere quiet and celebrate properly. The world can wait a few hours. They rode out of town to a meadow Ethan knew where a creek ran clear and cottonwoods provided shade. They spread out the blanket Sam's wife had included, and unpacked fried chicken, fresh bread, apple pie, and a bottle of wine that must have cost more than Sam could easily afford. To marriage, Lydia said, raising a tin cup of wine. To us, Ethan corrected, touching his cup to hers. To surviving everything the world threw at us, and still choosing this. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the rare moment of peace. Afterward, Lydia lay back on the blanket, the blue shawl pillowed under her head, and stared up at the sky through the cottonwood leaves. Tell me what you are thinking, Ethan said, lying beside her. I am thinking about all the things I imagined when I agreed to marry Thomas Whitmore. Her voice was contemplative. Not bitter. I thought I would have a fine house in town. Nice dresses, maybe a maid to help with the work. Social standing. She turned her head to look at him. Instead, I got a drafty cabin, 2 dresses to my name, hands permanently stained with work, and a reputation that might never fully recover. Ethan's chest tightened. I am sorry I cannot give you those things. I am not. Lydia rolled onto her side to face him fully, because what I got instead was real. A partner who sees me as an equal. Work that matters. Land under my feet that I help build into something lasting. And love. Actual love. Not the performance of it. Whitmore would have given me things. You gave me a life. He kissed her, tasting wine and apple in the future they were choosing together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Lydia laughed. We should probably head back before someone comes looking for us. Let them look. But Ethan stood, offering his hand to pull her up. Though you are right, the cattle will not feed themselves. Such romance, Lydia teased. My husband of 3 hours already talking about cattle. My wife of 3 hours already talking about chores, he shot back. But they were both smiling as they packed up and rode back toward the ranch, toward home. The months that followed the wedding settled into a new rhythm, one built on partnership rather than desperation. Fall arrived with its crisp air and changing leaves, and they worked together to prepare for winter. The remaining garden vegetables were harvested and preserved. Firewood was cut and stacked. The cattle were driven to market where they brought a decent price that allowed them to buy supplies and still have a small cushion for emergencies. Lydia took in sewing work from town, her reputation slowly rebuilding as people saw the quality of her craftsmanship. Ethan occasionally hired himself out for breaking horses or helping neighbors with heavy labor. Between them, they managed to not just survive, but to gradually build something more stable. Winter came hard that year with storms that piled snow to the eaves and temperatures that froze water solid in minutes. But the cabin was tight and warm, well stocked with food and firewood. On the longest, coldest nights, they sat by the fire and talked about the future in concrete terms. I want to expand the herd come spring, Ethan said one evening. Maybe 20 more head if we can afford it. We could use the north pasture, Lydia agreed. It is good grazing land, just needs fencing. That will take most of our spare capital, but it is an investment, better than letting the money sit. She looked up from the shirt she was mending. We need to think bigger, Ethan. Not just surviving season to season, but actually building wealth. He loved watching her think through problems, her mind quick and practical. What else? Chickens, more of them, and maybe a few pigs for meat and income. I could sell eggs and butter more consistently if we had more animals producing. She paused. And we should plant fruit trees in the spring. They will take years to bear, but our children will have fresh fruit. Our children? Ethan tested the words, found they fit comfortably. How many are we planning? As many as we are blessed with. Lydia's smile was soft. I always wanted a big family, brothers and sisters who looked out for each other. What about you? Never thought about it much before. He pulled her close, her back against his chest. But now I think I would like 3 or 4. Enough to help with the ranch. Enough to never feel as alone as I did. Then we will need to add on to the cabin. Lydia tilted her head back to look at him. More bedrooms. Maybe a proper kitchen with a real stove instead of this old thing. They dreamed together in the firelight, planning a future that felt increasingly possible. The fear that had driven so much of their early relationship had gradually transformed into cautious optimism. They had survived the worst the frontier could throw at them. Surely they could handle whatever came next. In January, Lydia woke one morning and immediately rushed outside to be sick. Ethan found her leaning against the cabin wall, her face pale and her hand pressed to her stomach. I am fine, she said before he could ask. Just something I ate. But when it happened again the next day and the day after that, they both knew what it meant. I am pregnant, Lydia said one evening, her hand resting protectively over her still flat belly. I am sure of it. Ethan felt joy and terror in equal measure. A child, his child, their child, new life growing in the woman he loved, vulnerable and precious, and entirely dependent on their ability to protect and provide. Are you happy? Lydia asked, watching his face carefully. Terrified, he admitted, but yes, happy. Me too. She took his hand, placed it over her stomach. Both those things at once, is that normal? I think that is parenthood. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her gently, being terrified and happy and determined all at the same time. The pregnancy progressed through the tail end of winter and into spring. Lydia continued working as long as she could, though Ethan gradually took over the heavier tasks. Her belly swelled with new life, and Ethan found himself talking to the baby before it was even born. Your mother is the strongest person I know, he would say, his hand resting on Lydia's stomach while they lay in bed at night. She survived things that would have broken most people. You are lucky to have her. And your father, Lydia would add, is the most loyal man alive. Once he loves you, he will never stop, never waver. You are lucky to have him too. Spring arrived with the usual chaos of new calves and garden planting and endless repairs. But this spring felt different. charged with anticipation. They were preparing not just for another season, but for a completely new chapter. Margaret wrote from California, her letter full of excitement about becoming an aunt. She sent baby clothes her son had outgrown and promised to visit after the birth. Sam Brennan and his wife offered to help when the time came. Even Mrs. Patterson stopped by with offers of assistance, her earlier judgment apparently forgotten, or at least set aside. In late April, on a morning when the meadowlarks were singing and the air smelled of new grass, Lydia's labor began. Ethan had faced artillery fire and cavalry charges without flinching, but watching Lydia in pain, unable to do anything except hold her hand and wipe sweat from her forehead, nearly broke him. "You are doing fine," he said, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. "You are so strong, just a little more." "Easy for you to say," Lydia gasped between contractions. "You are not," she cut off with a groan, her hand crushing his. Mrs. Brennan, who had come to help with the delivery, moved between Lydia's legs with practiced efficiency. "I can see the head. Next contraction, you push hard." What followed was the longest hour of Ethan's life. Lydia pushed and screamed and swore at him in ways that would have been funny under any other circumstances. He held her, supported her, whispered encouragement even when he felt completely useless. And then finally a baby's cry split the air. "It is a girl," Mrs. Brennan announced, lifting a tiny red squalling creature into view. A healthy baby girl. Lydia collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. "A girl? We have a daughter." Mrs. Brennan cleaned the baby quickly, wrapped her in soft cloth, and placed her in Lydia's arms. Ethan stared down at the tiny face, impossibly small, with wispy dark hair and eyes that would probably turn hazel like her mother's. His daughter. His and Lydia's daughter. "She is perfect," he said, his voice breaking. "She is ours," Lydia corrected, looking up at him with exhausted joy. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names, but nothing had felt quite right. Now looking at this new person they had created, Ethan suddenly knew. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." Lydia's smile was radiant. "Hope Cole, yes, that is perfect." The years that followed proved Ethan right about everything that mattered. Another daughter arrived 2 years after Hope. They named her Grace. Then a son whom they called James after the cousin Ethan had never met, but whose inheritance had saved their ranch. The cabin expanded with each new arrival. Rooms added on as the family grew. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. They never became wealthy, but they built security through hard work and careful planning. Ethan's herd grew to nearly 200 head. Lydia's garden became legendary in the county, and she taught other women her preservation techniques. They hired occasional help during busy seasons, giving work to young men trying to get their start the way Ethan once had. Hope grew into a serious, thoughtful child who followed her father everywhere, learning the ranch from the ground up. Grace was the wild one, always climbing trees and bringing home injured animals to heal. James had his mother's practical mind, already talking about expansion and investment at age 6. Margaret visited every few years, bringing her son Daniel, who became a beloved cousin to the Cole children. She had remarried a kind man who treated her well, and watching her happiness helped heal something in Ethan that he had not realized was still wounded. Sam Brennan remained their closest friend in town, his faith in them vindicated by their success. Even Thomas Whitmore eventually left Stillwater, his banking career having faltered while Ethan's ranch flourished. Ethan felt no satisfaction in Whitmore's downfall, only gratitude that Lydia had been spared a life with a man who would have diminished her. 10 years after their wedding, Ethan and Lydia stood together on the porch they had rebuilt twice to accommodate their growing family. Hope was 12 now, already as tall as her mother. Grace chased chickens in the yard while James explained to anyone who would listen about his plan to build a bigger barn. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked, the question he had carried for a decade finally finding voice. "Staying here instead of finding something easier?" Lydia looked at him like he had grown a second head. Easier? Ethan Cole. "I have worked harder in these 10 years than in my entire life before. My hands are calloused. My back aches every morning. And I cannot remember the last time I wore a dress that was not mended at least 3 times. His heart sank, but then she smiled, that radiant expression that had first made him believe in possibilities. "And I would not trade a single moment of it," she continued, "because this life is real, built by our hands, earned by our work, shared between us. It is ours, Ethan, completely ours. How could I possibly regret that? He pulled her close, mindful of their children playing nearby. I love you, Lydia Cole. I love you too. She kissed him softly. My stubborn, loyal, impossible husband who took in a stranger and built a family. Our family, he corrected. Our family, she agreed, and our legacy. That night after the children were finally asleep and the ranch was quiet, Ethan stood at the bedroom window, looking out at land he had fought to keep. Land that now held not just his dreams but his children's future. Land that had transformed from a hermit's hiding place into a family's home. Lydia joined him at the window, sliding her arm around his waist. What are you thinking, she asked. That I was wrong, Ethan said. All those years I spent alone, I thought I was protecting myself. Thought isolation was strength. But I was just scared. Of what? Of this. He gestured to encompass the ranch. Their sleeping children. The life they had built. Of caring about something so much that losing it would destroy me. I thought if I never let anyone matter, I could never be hurt again. And now, Lydia's voice was gentle. Now I know that is not living. That is just existing. He turned to face her fully. You taught me that. You and the children. This ranch, all of it. You taught me that being vulnerable is not weakness. It is the only way to actually live. Lydia's eyes shimmered with tears. You taught me something too. You taught me that my worth is not determined by what other people say about me. That I am not defined by one man's rejection or a town's judgment. You saw me when everyone else looked away. That changed everything. They held each other in the moonlight streaming through the window. Two people who had started as outcasts and built something neither could have created alone. Outside Montana stretched away in all directions, wild and beautiful and sometimes harsh, but theirs. Tell me a story, Lydia said, the request that had become their evening ritual. Tell me about us. So Ethan did, his voice low and warm in the darkness. He told her about a woman who had appeared in his cabin like a miracle he did not deserve, about flood and fire and desperation that had forged them together, about small victories and crushing setbacks and the decision to keep fighting anyway, about a baby named Hope who had proven that damaged people could create something whole. And as he spoke, weaving their history into words, Ethan realized that this was the story he had been meant to live all along. Not the tragedy of war or the emptiness of isolation, but this, the messy, difficult, beautiful story of two broken people who had chosen to heal together. The woman no one wanted had become the heart of a thriving family. The man who had chosen solitude had found his home in partnership. And the ranch that had nearly been lost was now a legacy that would stretch across generations. Under the wide Montana sky, where mountains met prairie and hope met hard work, the Cole family slept. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as tomorrow always did on the frontier. But they would face it together, husband and wife, parents and children, a family built from loss and love, and the stubborn refusal to give up. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything.